The harsh Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trading post, its rays creating shimmering waves of heat that danced above the weathered wooden planks. Sarah Running Bear pressed her small frame against the rough adobe wall, her dark eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the Apache raiders who had taken everything from her. At barely 8 years old, she had already witnessed more horror than most adults would see in a lifetime. The year was 1847, and the American Southwest was a lawless frontier where survival often came at the cost of one's humanity. Sarah's Navajo village had been peaceful, nestled in a hidden canyon where her people had lived for generations. Her father, Joseph Running Bear, was a respected medicine man who had taught her the old ways: how to read the signs in nature, how to find water in the desert, and how to honor the spirits of their ancestors. But 3 weeks ago, everything had changed in a single terrifying night. Sarah could still hear the thundering hoofbeats that had shattered her sleep, still smell the acrid smoke that had filled her nostrils as Apache warriors swept through their village like a plague of locusts. The Navajo and Apache had been enemies for generations, their conflicts fueled by competition for hunting grounds and ancient grievances that ran deeper than the canyon walls themselves. Her mother, Maria, had grabbed Sarah's hand in the darkness, pulling her toward the secret cave her father had shown them for emergencies. But they hadn't been fast enough. An Apache warrior on horseback had spotted them, his painted face grotesque in the firelight that consumed their home. Maria had pushed Sarah behind a large boulder and whispered desperately in Navajo, "Stay hidden, my little one. No matter what happens, stay hidden until the sun rises 3 times." Those were the last words Sarah ever heard her mother speak. Now, as she crouched in the shadows of Miguel Hernandez's trading post, Sarah's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, surviving only on the brackish water she could find in scattered puddles after the last brief desert rainfall. Her traditional Navajo dress, once colorful and adorned with her grandmother's turquoise beads, was now torn and stained with dirt and blood. Miguel Hernandez was a weathered Mexican trader who had built his modest empire by dealing with anyone who had something to sell. Mexican ranchers, American settlers, and yes, even Apache raiders looking to trade their stolen goods. His trading post sat at the crossroads of several important trails, making it a necessary stop for anyone traveling through this unforgiving landscape. Sarah had been watching the trading post for hours, studying the patterns of people coming and going. She had learned to be patient, to observe before acting, lessons her father had taught her during their hunting expeditions in what now felt like another lifetime. The trading post was constructed of thick adobe walls that provided blessed relief from the desert sun, with a covered porch where travelers could rest their horses and conduct business. The main building housed Miguel's store, where shelves lined the walls, displaying everything from ammunition and tobacco to bolts of cloth and precious coffee beans. Behind the store was Miguel's modest living quarters, and to the side stood a small stable where horses could be watered and fed for a price. The entire compound was surrounded by a low wall, not high enough to stop determined attackers, but sufficient to keep out wandering livestock and provide some sense of security. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah noticed a group of Apache warriors approaching from the east, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that were visible long before the riders themselves became clear. Her heart began to race, and she pressed herself even deeper into the shadows. These might be the same men who had destroyed her village, who had killed her parents and taken her younger brother Thomas captive. The Apache riders numbered 6 in total, their faces painted with traditional war markings that made them appear even more fearsome in the harsh desert light. Their leader, a tall man with graying hair braided with feathers and small bones, dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. Sarah recognized him immediately. It was Cochise's war chief, a man her father had spoken of with both respect and fear. The war chief's name was Stone Eagle, and his reputation for ruthlessness was legendary throughout the territory. He had led countless raids against both Mexican and American settlements, and it was said that he showed no mercy to his enemies. Sarah watched in terror as Stone Eagle approached Miguel's trading post, his hand resting casually on the knife at his belt. Miguel emerged from his store with the cautious but practiced demeanor of a man who had learned to navigate dangerous waters. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with graying hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the desert sun. Despite the obvious danger, Miguel's voice remained steady as he greeted the Apache warriors in their own language, a skill that had kept him alive and prosperous in this volatile region. "Stone Eagle," Miguel said with a respectful nod, "you honor my humble trading post with your presence. What brings you to my establishment on this scorching day?" Stone Eagle's dark eyes surveyed the trading post with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing potential threats and opportunities. When he spoke, his English was precise but heavily accented, each word carefully chosen. "We have goods to trade, Mexican, goods that will bring you profit if you have the stomach for such business." Sarah's blood ran cold as she watched one of the other Apache warriors lead a string of horses toward the trading post. Tied to the horses were bundles of goods, blankets, pottery, silver jewelry, and other items that Sarah recognized as belonging to her people. But what made her heart nearly stop beating was the sight of 3 small figures walking behind the horses, their hands bound with rawhide rope. Children, Apache prisoners, just as she had been meant to be. But as the group drew closer, Sarah realized with growing horror that one of the children looked familiar. The smallest of the 3, a boy of perhaps 6 years old, had the same distinctive birthmark on his left cheek that her brother Thomas carried. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the remnants of the shirt their mother had made for him just before the raid. Thomas was alive, but he was now a prisoner of the very men who had destroyed their family. Miguel's expression remained carefully neutral as he examined the goods the Apache had brought, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. Trading with the Apache was always dangerous, but it was also incredibly profitable. The warriors brought silver, turquoise, and other valuable items taken from their raids, and Miguel could trade these for substantial sums to American merchants traveling the Santa Fe Trail. "These are fine goods," Miguel said diplomatically, running his hands over a particularly beautiful Navajo blanket that Sarah recognized as her grandmother's work. "But what of the children? They are not goods to be traded." Stone Eagle's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Everything has a price, Mexican. These young ones were taken in our raid on the Navajo dogs 3 weeks past. They are strong, and they will work hard for whoever claims them. The boy especially, he has spirit that has not yet been broken." Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she fought the urge to rush forward and attack these men with her bare hands. The rational part of her mind, the part her father had trained to think before acting, reminded her that such an action would only result in her own capture or death. But seeing Thomas standing there, his small frame trembling with fear and exhaustion, nearly broke her resolve. Miguel stepped closer to examine the children, and Sarah could see the conflict playing out on his weathered features. He was a businessman first and foremost, but even he had limits to what he would trade. The practice of selling captive children was unfortunately common on the frontier, where Apache, Comanche, and other tribes regularly took prisoners during raids. These children might be sold to Mexican families as servants, to American settlers as laborers, or even traded back to their own people if the price was right. "The boy appears sick," Miguel observed, noting Thomas's pale complexion and the way he swayed on his feet. "Sick children are poor investments. They die too easily in this heat." Stone Eagle studied Thomas with the dispassionate gaze of a man evaluating livestock. "The boy is stronger than he appears. He has walked for many days without complaint. His people valued him highly. His father was a medicine man, and this one shows signs of having inherited the gift." Sarah's heart ached as she remembered her father teaching both her and Thomas the traditional healing arts. Joseph Running Bear had been training his son to follow in his footsteps, passing down knowledge that had been accumulated over countless generations. Now that knowledge might be used to justify a higher price for her brother's bondage. The negotiations continued for what felt like hours, with Miguel and Stone Eagle haggling over prices for various goods, while the three captive children stood silently in the blazing sun. Sarah noticed that Thomas kept glancing around, as if searching for something or someone. She wondered if he was looking for her, if he somehow sensed that she was nearby. Finally, the two men reached an agreement. Miguel would take the blankets, jewelry and pottery in exchange for ammunition, tobacco and whiskey, but the children remained a point of contention. "I will take the girl," Miguel finally said, pointing to one of the captives, a Navajo girl of perhaps 10 years old. "But the boys are too much risk. Boys grow into warriors, and warriors remember those who held them captive." Stone Eagle considered this for a long moment, his gaze shifting between the three children. "Very well, the girl for $20 in trade goods, but the boys come with us. We will find other buyers, or we will keep them as slaves." Sarah watched in agony as the transaction was completed. The young Navajo girl, whose name Sarah learned was Blue Flower, was untied and led into Miguel's compound. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she moved with the resigned dignity of someone who understood that resistance would only bring more suffering. Thomas and the other boy, however, remained with Stone Eagle's band. As the Apache warriors prepared to leave, Sarah made a desperate decision. She couldn't save her brother now, not while he was surrounded by 6 armed warriors, but she could follow them and look for an opportunity to help him escape. But as she prepared to move from her hiding place, fate intervened in the form of an approaching dust cloud from the west. A small wagon was making its way toward the trading post, drawn by 2 tired-looking mules and driven by what appeared to be an elderly couple. Stone Eagle noticed the approaching wagon as well, and his eyes narrowed with interest. "More potential customers, Mexican. Perhaps they will have use for young workers." The wagon drew closer, and Sarah could make out more details about its occupants. The driver was a man of perhaps 60 years, with silver hair and a beard that spoke of months spent on the trail. Beside him sat a woman of similar age, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her dress simple but well-made. They had the look of settlers, possibly headed for California or one of the other western territories where land was still available for those brave enough to claim it. But there was something different about this couple, something in their bearing that suggested they were not ordinary pioneers. The man handled the reins with confidence, but his clothes were of better quality than most travelers wore on the frontier. The woman carried herself with a dignity that suggested education and refinement, despite the obvious hardships of trail life. As their wagon approached the trading post, the woman's eyes fell upon the group of Apache warriors and the captive children. Sarah saw her stiffen, her hand reaching instinctively for her husband's arm. Even from her hiding place, Sarah could see the horror and compassion that crossed the woman's features as she took in the scene. The couple brought their wagon to a stop near the trading post, and the man climbed down with the careful movements of someone whose joints had been stiffened by long days of travel. He was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet strength that came from a lifetime of hard work rather than violence. His wife remained seated, but her eyes never left the captive children. "Good afternoon," the man said, addressing Miguel with a polite nod. His voice carried a slight accent that Sarah couldn't quite place, but his English was clear and well-spoken. "I am Samuel Whitman, and this is my wife, Catherine. We were hoping to purchase some supplies and perhaps water our mules." Miguel stepped forward with his practiced trader's smile, but Sarah noticed that Stone Eagle was studying the newcomers with renewed interest. The Apache war chief had undoubtedly noticed the same things Sarah had. These were not ordinary settlers, and they likely carried more wealth than most travelers. "Of course, Senor Whitman," Miguel replied. "You are most welcome at my establishment. I have grain for your animals and whatever supplies you might need for your journey." Samuel Whitman's gaze moved past Miguel to take in the Apache warriors and their captives. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but when he spoke, his voice remained calm and controlled. "I see you have other customers as well. Perhaps we should wait until their business is concluded before conducting our own." Stone Eagle stepped forward, his hand moving to rest on his knife handle, not quite a threat, but certainly a reminder of the danger he represented. "There is no need to wait, white man. Our business is nearly finished. Perhaps you would be interested in some of our wares?" Catherine Whitman climbed down from the wagon, despite her husband's subtle attempt to keep her seated. She was a small woman, but she carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her blue eyes, though kind, held a strength that suggested she was not easily intimidated. "What manner of wares?" she asked, though Sarah could tell from her tone that she already suspected the answer. Stone Eagle gestured toward Thomas and the other boy. "Young workers, Senora. Strong backs, quick minds. They would serve you well on your journey west." The silence that followed was pregnant with tension. Samuel Whitman's jaw tightened, and Catherine's hands clenched at her sides. Sarah held her breath, wondering what these strangers would do, hoping against hope that they might somehow help her brother. "We are not in the market for workers," Samuel said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "We believe that all people should be free to choose their own paths in life." Stone Eagle's eyes narrowed at this implicit criticism of his actions. "Free?" He laughed harshly. "Tell me, white man, were my people free when your army drove us from our lands? Were we free when your people killed our buffalo and poisoned our water holes? These children are spoils of war, taken from our enemies who would show us no mercy." "Two wrongs do not create a right," Catherine said quietly, but her words carried clearly in the desert air. "Children are not spoils of war. They are innocents who deserve protection, not bondage." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could see Stone Eagle's warriors shifting restlessly, their hands moving closer to their weapons. Miguel looked increasingly nervous, clearly wanting to avoid a confrontation that could destroy his carefully maintained neutrality. But before the situation could escalate further, Thomas suddenly collapsed. The young boy had been standing in the blazing sun for hours without water, and his small body finally succumbed to the heat and exhaustion. He crumpled to the ground like a broken doll, his breathing shallow and labored. Catherine Whitman didn't hesitate. Despite the danger, despite the armed Apache warriors standing just feet away, she rushed forward and knelt beside Thomas. Her experienced hands checked his pulse and felt his forehead, her face grave with concern. "This child is severely dehydrated," she announced, looking up at Stone Eagle with accusation in her eyes. "He needs water and shade immediately, or he will die." Stone Eagle shrugged with apparent indifference. "If he dies, he dies. The weak do not survive in the desert." "No," Catherine said firmly, rising to her feet. "I will not allow a child to die when I have the power to prevent it." She turned to her husband, and Sarah saw a silent communication pass between them. Samuel nodded, almost imperceptibly, and Catherine turned back to Stone Eagle. "Name your price for the boy." Stone Eagle's eyebrows rose in surprise. He had clearly expected the Whitmans to drive away in disgust, not make an offer for one of his captives. He studied Catherine's determined face for a long moment before responding. $100 in gold, Senora. The boy is valuable. His father was a medicine man, and he has been trained in their healing arts." Samuel stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. "That is an outrageous sum. No child is worth such a price." "Then let him die," Stone Eagle replied coldly. Catherine looked down at Thomas's unconscious form, then back at the Apache war chief. $50, and we will throw in that bolt of blue cloth from our wagon. $80 and the cloth. $60, the cloth, and a bag of coffee beans. Stone Eagle considered this offer for a long moment. Sarah could see him calculating, weighing the immediate profit against the potential future value of keeping Thomas as a slave. Finally, he nodded. Agreed, but payment in gold, not paper promises. Samuel moved to their wagon and returned with a small leather pouch. He counted out $60 in gold coins, their weight substantial in his weathered palm. Catherine retrieved the cloth and coffee beans, her movements quick and efficient. The transaction was completed in minutes, with Miguel serving as witness to ensure that both parties honored their agreement. As soon as the gold changed hands, Catherine was back at Thomas's side, cradling his head and offering him small sips of water from her canteen. Stone Eagle and his warriors gathered their remaining goods and prepared to depart, taking the other captive boy with them. As they mounted their horses, the war chief fixed Samuel with a hard stare. "You have bought yourself a burden, white man. That boy carries the blood of our enemies. Do not expect gratitude for your mercy." "I expect nothing but the chance to do what is right," Samuel replied quietly. With that, the Apache warriors rode away, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust that obscured them from view within minutes. Sarah watched them go with a mixture of relief and anguish. Relief that Thomas was safe, but anguish that the other captive boy was still in their hands. As the dust settled, Catherine continued her ministrations to Thomas, gradually bringing him back to consciousness. Samuel spoke quietly with Miguel, arranging for rooms where they could rest for the night and allow the boy to recover his strength. Sarah remained hidden, watching and listening as the Whitmans tended to her brother with genuine care and compassion. She could hear Catherine speaking softly to Thomas in English, her voice gentle and reassuring despite the language barrier. Thomas seemed to respond to her kindness, allowing her to help him sit up and take more water. "What is your name, child?" Catherine asked, but Thomas only stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Samuel approached and knelt beside his wife. "He may not speak English, Catherine, and even if he does, he's probably too terrified to trust us yet. His name is Thomas," Blueflower said suddenly from where she sat in the shade of the trading post. "Thomas Running Bear. He is Navajo like me. His sister," she paused, glancing around as if she might see Sarah watching. "His sister escaped when our village was attacked. He has been looking for her." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at Thomas. "You poor child. You've lost everything, haven't you?" Thomas seemed to understand the emotion in her voice, even if he couldn't follow her words. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the attack on his village, tears began to flow down his dust-stained cheeks. "What will happen to him now?" Samuel asked his wife quietly. Catherine smoothed Thomas's dark hair with gentle fingers. "We'll take care of him, of course. We'll take him with us to California, give him a home, a family." Catherine," Samuel said carefully, "we don't speak his language. We don't know his customs, his people's ways. How can we raise a child so different from ourselves?" "Love is a universal language, Samuel," Catherine replied firmly, "and this child needs love more than anything else right now." As the sun began to set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't reveal herself yet, not while there was still danger from Apache raiders or other threats, but she would follow the Whitmans, stay close to her brother, and wait for the right moment to reunite with him. She had found Thomas, and more importantly, she had found people who seemed genuinely committed to his welfare. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel a small glimmer of hope. The first chapter of their story was ending, but Sarah sensed that their real journey was just beginning. The Whitmans had saved Thomas from slavery, but the challenges ahead would test all of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As darkness fell over the trading post, Sarah settled into her hiding place for another night of watching and waiting. Tomorrow, she would begin following the small wagon that now carried her brother toward an uncertain but hopefully brighter future. The desert night was filled with the sounds of coyotes calling to their pack, and Sarah couldn't help but think that she understood exactly how they felt. She too was searching for her family, calling out across the vast wilderness, hoping against hope that someday they would be reunited. But for now, it was enough to know that Thomas was alive, that he was safe, and that there were still good people in the world willing to risk everything to protect an innocent child. The story of Sarah Running Bear was far from over, and the next chapter would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new hopes as the small wagon train headed west into the unknown territories where dreams were made and broken with equal measure. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, a sound that spoke of progress and change coming to the American frontier. Sarah didn't know it yet, but that train would play a crucial role in the next chapter of her story, bringing with it both opportunity and peril for her newfound family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as Samuel Whitman carefully loaded their wagon for the journey ahead. 3 days had passed since they had purchased Thomas's freedom from Stone Eagle, and the young Navajo boy had slowly begun to regain his strength under Catherine's tender care. The fever that had gripped him during his first night at the trading post had broken, and though he remained silent and wary, there were moments when Catherine caught glimpses of the intelligent, curious child he had been before tragedy struck his family. Thomas sat on the edge of the wagon, his small legs dangling as he watched Samuel secure their supplies with practiced efficiency. The man moved with deliberate care, checking each rope and knot twice, ensuring that nothing would come loose during the arduous journey across the desert. Catherine emerged from Miguel's trading post carrying a bundle of additional medical supplies she had purchased, her face showing the determined optimism that had carried her through 23 years of marriage to Samuel. "The boy seems stronger today," Miguel observed, approaching the wagon with Blue Flower, walking silently beside him. The Navajo girl had become Thomas's unofficial translator and companion during their stay, helping him understand the strange new world he had been thrust into. "Perhaps the journey will not be too difficult for him." Catherine knelt beside Thomas, gently examining his eyes and feeling his forehead for any sign of returning fever. "He's resilient," she said softly. "Children often are, even after experiencing such trauma. But the real challenge will be helping him learn to trust again, to believe that he's truly safe." From her hidden vantage point in the rocky outcropping 100 yards from the trading post, Sarah watched every detail of the preparations. She had spent the past 3 days observing the Whitmans, studying their habits and routines, trying to understand what kind of people had purchased her brother's freedom. What she had seen filled her with cautious hope. Samuel treated Thomas with patient kindness, never forcing interaction, but always offering gentle encouragement. He had carved a small wooden horse for the boy, spending an entire evening working by lamplight to smooth every edge and detail. When he presented it to Thomas, the child had stared at the gift for long minutes before finally accepting it, clutching it close to his chest as he slept. Catherine's maternal instincts had awakened with fierce intensity. She seemed to anticipate Thomas's needs before he could express them, offering food when he was hungry, water when he was thirsty, and comfort when nightmares disturbed his sleep. Sarah had watched through the window as Catherine sat beside Thomas's bedroll, humming soft melodies until his restless movements ceased and peaceful sleep claimed him. But Sarah also noticed other things that concerned her. The Whitmans spoke only English, while Thomas understood primarily Navajo, with a few words of Spanish learned from traders. The cultural gap between them was vast: different foods, different customs, different ways of understanding the world. How could these well-meaning strangers possibly provide Thomas with the connection to his heritage that he would need to thrive? As the final preparations were completed, Samuel helped Thomas climb into the back of the wagon, arranging blankets and supplies to create a comfortable space for the child. Catherine took her place on the driver's bench, her hands steady on the reins despite the challenges that lay ahead. They were traveling with a small wagon train of 6 other families, all bound for California, where rumors of gold and fertile land had created dreams of prosperity. The wagon master was a grizzled frontiersman named Josiah Fletcher, a man in his 50s who had made the journey west more than a dozen times. His weathered face spoke of countless days under the burning sun, and his sharp eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the travelers under his protection. Fletcher had initially been skeptical about the Whitmans bringing a Native American child on the journey, warning them about potential conflicts with other travelers who might not share their humanitarian views. "That boy's going to bring trouble," Fletcher had warned Samuel on their first night with the wagon train. "There's folks in this group who've lost family to Indian raids. They see that child, they're going to remember their own grief and anger. Samuel had met Fletcher's gaze steadily. Then they'll have to answer to me. The boy is under our protection now, and I'll not see him harmed by ignorance and prejudice. Fletcher had studied Samuel for a long moment before nodding grudgingly. You're either very brave or very foolish, Whitman. Time will tell which. Now, as the wagon train prepared to depart Miguel's trading post, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her young life. Following the wagons on foot across the desert would be nearly impossible. The wagon train would cover 15 to 20 miles per day, a pace she couldn't hope to match while remaining hidden. But the alternative, losing track of Thomas, was unthinkable. As she wrestled with this dilemma, fate intervened in an unexpected way. A lone rider approached the trading post from the east, his horse lathered with sweat from hard travel. The man was clearly Mexican, dressed in the elaborate clothing of a wealthy rancher, with silver conchos decorating his jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that provided blessed shade from the desert sun. Miguel emerged from his establishment to greet the newcomer, and Sarah strained to hear their conversation. The man identified himself as Don Ricardo Mendoza, owner of a vast ranch in the Sacramento Valley of California. He was returning home after conducting business in Santa Fe and was seeking to join the wagon train for protection during the dangerous journey through Apache territory. I have my own supplies and guards, Mendoza explained to Fletcher. I ask only for the safety that comes from traveling in numbers. These are dangerous times, and a man alone is vulnerable to bandits and raiders. Fletcher examined Mendoza's credentials and spoke quietly with Samuel and the other wagon train leaders. After a brief discussion, they agreed to allow the wealthy rancher to join their group. Mendoza's additional guards would strengthen their defenses, and his knowledge of the territory could prove valuable. But what caught Sarah's attention was Mendoza's traveling party. In addition to 4 well-armed vaqueros who served as his bodyguards, he was accompanied by an elderly Navajo woman named Maria Lightfoot, who served as his housekeeper and translator. Maria had been with Mendoza's family for more than 20 years, and her presence suggested that the rancher was more tolerant of Native Americans than many of his contemporaries. As the wagon train finally began to move, Sarah made her desperate choice. She emerged from her hiding place and approached Maria Lightfoot, who was walking beside Mendoza's horse at the rear of the procession. The old woman's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Sarah, taking in her torn dress and obvious exhaustion. "Grandmother," Sarah said in Navajo, using the respectful term for an elder, "I need your help." Maria's weathered face showed immediate concern. "Child, where did you come from? Are you hurt?" Sarah quickly explained her situation, telling Maria about the attack on her village, her escape, and her brother's rescue by the Whitmans. She begged the old woman to help her stay close to Thomas during the journey west. Maria listened with growing alarm and compassion. As a member of the same tribe, she understood the bonds of family that drove Sarah's desperate actions, but she also recognized the dangers the child faced traveling alone across hostile territory. "Don Ricardo," Maria called softly to her employer, "this child needs our help." Mendoza reined in his horse and looked down at Sarah with curious eyes. His face was aristocratically handsome despite his 50-odd years, with graying temples and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. But there was kindness in his expression as he took in Sarah's obvious distress. Maria quickly explained Sarah's situation in Spanish, emphasizing the girl's courage and determination to remain near her brother. Mendoza listened thoughtfully, occasionally asking questions about the attack on Sarah's village and her subsequent survival in the desert. "This is a remarkable child," Mendoza said finally. "To survive alone in the desert for 3 weeks, to track her brother to the trading post, to resist the temptation to reveal herself when it might have brought danger. These are not the actions of an ordinary 8-year-old. He studied Sarah for a long moment, noting her intelligent eyes and the proud way she held herself despite her obvious exhaustion. "Maria, ask her if she would be willing to travel with us as your assistant." We cannot simply leave her to die in the desert, and she clearly will not abandon her brother." Sarah's heart leaped with hope as Maria translated Mendoza's offer. She would pose as Maria's granddaughter, helping with cooking and other camp duties in exchange for food, protection, and the chance to remain close to Thomas. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The wagon trains stretched out across the desert landscape like a modern Noah's Ark, carrying families and their possessions toward the promised land of California. Samuel and Catherine's wagon traveled near the middle of the procession, with Thomas sometimes walking alongside when the terrain was smooth, and sometimes riding in the back when the boy grew tired. Sarah, now traveling as Maria's granddaughter, found herself in the unique position of being able to observe her brother from a distance while remaining hidden from his sight. She watched as Catherine patiently attempted to teach Thomas English words, pointing to objects and repeating their names with encouraging smiles. She saw Samuel's quiet efforts to include the boy in simple tasks, showing him how to care for the mules and maintain their equipment. But Sarah also witnessed moments of profound sadness that nearly broke her heart. Sometimes she would see Thomas standing apart from the other travelers, staring eastward toward the homeland they had left behind. His small shoulders would shake with silent sobs, and Sarah had to restrain herself from running to comfort him. Those were the moments when the full weight of their separation felt unbearable. The wagon train's daily routine was dictated by the harsh realities of desert travel. They would break camp before dawn, when the air was still cool and the animals were fresh. The first few hours of travel were the most productive, covering good ground before the sun reached its punishing peak. By mid-morning, the heat would become oppressive, forcing frequent stops to rest the animals and allow the travelers to seek shade. During the hottest part of the day, usually between noon and 4 o'clock, the wagon train would make extended stops at whatever shade they could find. These rest periods became opportunities for the travelers to interact, share meals, and build the relationships that would sustain them through the challenges ahead. It was during one of these rest stops that Sarah witnessed the first serious conflict involving Thomas. The Whitman wagon was stopped beneath a grove of scraggly mesquite trees, their sparse shade providing minimal relief from the desert sun. Catherine was preparing a simple meal of beans and hardtack while Samuel tended to their mules. Thomas sat nearby, playing quietly with the wooden horse Samuel had carved for him. A group of children from other families had gathered in the shade, playing a game that involved tossing stones at a makeshift target. They ranged in age from 6 to 12, and their laughter provided a welcome respite from the monotony of travel. Thomas watched them with obvious longing, clearly wanting to join their play, but uncertain how to approach. One of the children, a boy of about 10 named Billy Morrison, noticed Thomas watching and called out to him, "Hey, Indian boy, you want to play?" Thomas didn't understand the words, but he recognized the invitation in Billy's tone and gestures. He stood up slowly, clutching his wooden horse, and approached the group with tentative steps. At first, the interaction went well. The children showed Thomas how to throw the stones, laughing when his aim was wide and cheering when he managed to hit the target. For a few precious minutes, Thomas seemed like any other child at play, his face brightening with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen since before the attack on their village. But the pleasant atmosphere changed when Billy's father, Jeremiah Morrison, emerged from beneath his family's wagon and saw his son playing with Thomas. Morrison was a big man with calloused hands and the perpetually sunburned complexion of someone who worked outdoors. He had lost his younger brother to a Comanche raid in Texas 5 years earlier, and that tragedy had filled him with an abiding hatred for all Native Americans. The sight of his son playing with Thomas triggered an immediate and violent reaction. "Billy!" Morrison bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire rest area. "Get away from that savage this instant!" The children froze, their innocent game forgotten in the face of Morrison's obvious anger. Thomas sensed the change in atmosphere immediately, taking a step backward as Morrison approached with clenched fists. "I don't want my boy playing with no Indian." Morrison declared loudly, ensuring that everyone in the area could hear him. "Bad enough we got to travel with one of them, but I won't have it corrupting my son with its heathen ways." Samuel Whitman appeared at Morrison's side with surprising speed, his usually calm demeanor replaced by cold fury. "That child has a name, Morrison. His name is Thomas, and he's under my protection." Morrison sneered at Samuel's challenge. "Protection? You mean you're fool enough to think you can domesticate a wild animal? That boy's got killing in his blood, Whitman. Mark my words, first chance he gets, he'll put a knife in your back." The only savagery I see here comes from you," Samuel replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Thomas is a child who has lost everything. He deserves compassion, not hatred based on ignorance." Other travelers had begun to gather, drawn by the raised voices and growing tension. Sarah watched from her position near Mendoza's wagon, her heart pounding with fear for her brother's safety. She could see Thomas backing away from the confrontation, his face pale with the recognition that he was somehow the cause of this anger. Catherine Whitman stepped between her husband and Morrison, her small frame dwarfed by the larger man's bulk, but her courage undeniable. "Gentlemen, please, this is hardly the place for such a discussion. We're all traveling together, and we need to find ways to coexist peacefully." "Oh, there ain't no peaceful coexistence with Indians, ma'am," Morrison replied, though he moderated his tone slightly out of respect for Catherine's gender. "They're born killers, every last one of them. That boy might seem harmless now, but give him a few years and he'll be raiding settlements just like his daddy probably did." "His father was a medicine man," Samuel said firmly. "A healer, not a warrior. And Thomas is just a frightened child who needs our help, not our hatred." Fletcher, the wagon master, pushed through the crowd with the authority of his position. "That's enough, all of you. We got enough real dangers to worry about without creating our own problems." He turned to address the group as a whole, his weathered face grave with concern. "Listen up, folks. We got Apache raiders in these parts, Mexican bandits looking to rob anyone they can catch, and desert that'll kill you if you make even small mistakes. We can't afford to be fighting among ourselves." Morrison wasn't ready to back down. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking, Fletcher. That Indian don't belong with decent folks. It's going to bring trouble down on all of us." "The boy stays," Fletcher said with finality. "The Whitmans paid good money for his freedom, and I won't go back on my word to let them travel with us. But Morrison's right about one thing. We can't have conflicts tearing apart this wagon train." Fletcher's gaze moved to include Samuel and Catherine. "Whitman, I respect what you did for that child, but you need to understand the position you've put everyone in. Half the people in this train have lost someone to Indian raids. They're not going to warm up to the boy overnight." Samuel nodded slowly, understanding the delicate balance Fletcher was trying to maintain. "We'll do our best to avoid conflicts, but I won't see Thomas mistreated because of other people's prejudices." "Fair enough," Fletcher agreed. "But keep him close, especially when we're in towns or around other travelers. There's plenty of folks out here who'd shoot first and ask questions later." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah watched her brother standing alone near the Whitman wagon, his wooden horse clutched tightly in his small hands. The brief moment of childhood joy had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of the world they now inhabited. Catherine approached Thomas and knelt beside him, speaking softly in English while offering the comfort of her presence. But Sarah could see that the damage had been done. Thomas had been reminded that he was different, that his very presence could cause conflict and danger for the people who had shown him kindness. The knowledge would weigh on him, making him more withdrawn and hesitant to trust. That evening, as the wagon train made camp for the night, Sarah found an opportunity to approach Maria Lightfoot with her concerns. "Grandmother," she said quietly in Navajo, "did you see what happened today?" Maria nodded gravely. "The white men carry much anger in their hearts. Your brother will face many such encounters on this journey." "I want to go to him," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to tell him that he's not alone, that his sister still watches over him." "Child," Maria said gently, "that would only bring more danger." If the others discover who you are, they might see it as proof that Indians are following the wagon train. Your brother is safer if you remain hidden." Sarah knew Maria was right, but the knowledge did nothing to ease her heartache. She spent that night lying awake, listening to the sounds of the desert and thinking about the challenges that lay ahead. The next morning brought new complications when scouts reported Apache sign to the north of their route. Fletcher called a meeting of the adult travelers to discuss their options, and the tension in the camp was palpable. "Fresh tracks," Fletcher announced grimly. "At least a dozen riders moving parallel to our route. Could be hunting party, could be war party. Either way, we need to be extra careful." The mention of Apache warriors sent a chill through the gathered travelers. Several of them glanced meaningfully at Thomas, who was helping Catherine prepare breakfast near their wagon. The implication was clear. Having a Native American child among them might attract unwanted attention from hostile tribes. Morrison was the first to voice what others were thinking. "Maybe it's time to reconsider having that Indian boy with us, Fletcher. His people might be looking for him, or other tribes might see him as a prize worth taking." Samuel stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Thomas stays with us. He's part of our family now, and we don't abandon family when things get difficult." "Your family?" Morrison laughed harshly. "That boy ain't nothing but a burden that's going to get us all killed. Mark my words, Whitman. Before this journey's over, you'll regret the day you bought that savage." The argument might have escalated further, but it was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A lone rider approached the camp from the east, his horse moving at a steady lope that suggested urgent business. The rider was a young man in his 20s, dressed in the practical clothing of a frontier scout. His face was weathered beyond his years, and his eyes held the wariness of someone who had seen too much violence. As he dismounted near Fletcher's wagon, Sarah noticed that he carried himself with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in the wilderness. "Name's Jake Sullivan," the newcomer announced, addressing Fletcher directly. "I'm scouting for a supply train about 2 days behind you. Thought you ought to know. There's been trouble up ahead." Fletcher's expression grew even more grave. "What kind of trouble?" Sullivan glanced around the camp, taking note of the various families and their equipment before answering. "Rogue Apache band hit a ranch about 50 miles west of here 3 days ago. Killed the rancher and his hands, burned the buildings, ran off the livestock. Local militia's been organized to hunt them down." The news sent a ripple of fear through the gathered travelers. Catherine instinctively moved closer to Thomas, her protective instincts awakening at the mention of Apache raiders. "Any idea how many?" Fletcher asked. "Witnesses say maybe 15-20 warriors," Sullivan replied. "Led by a war chief calls himself Stone Eagle. Real nasty piece of work from what I hear." Sarah's blood ran cold at the mention of Stone Eagle's name. The same Apache leader who had destroyed her village and taken her brother captive was still operating in the area, still spreading death and destruction wherever he went. But Sullivan's news got worse. "There's something else you need to know. The militia captain is a man named Colonel Marcus Steele. He's got orders from the territorial government to kill any Apache on sight, no questions asked. His men aren't too particular about distinguishing between hostiles and peaceful Indians." The implications were immediately clear to everyone in the camp. If they encountered Steele's militia while Thomas was traveling with them, the boy's life could be in serious danger. Military units operating under standing orders to kill Apache warriors might not hesitate to execute a Navajo child, especially if they believed he might provide information to enemy forces. Samuel and Catherine exchanged worried glances, both understanding that their decision to rescue Thomas had placed them in an increasingly dangerous position. But neither showed any sign of wavering in their commitment to protect the boy. Fletcher rubbed his grizzled chin thoughtfully. "How far out is this militia?" "Hard to say," Sullivan admitted. "They're moving fast, trying to catch Stone Eagle's trail before it goes cold. Could be anywhere between here and the Colorado River by now." The wagon master considered their options carefully. They could try to alter their route to avoid both the Apache raiders and the pursuing militia, but that would mean traveling through even more dangerous desert terrain with limited water sources. Alternatively, they could press forward on their planned route and hope to avoid conflict with either group. "We'll continue west as planned," Fletcher decided finally, "but we'll double the guard and keep the wagons closer together. And I want everyone armed at all times. Apache raiders are one thing, but trigger-happy soldiers might be even more dangerous." As the meeting broke up and the travelers prepared to resume their journey, Sarah overheard a conversation between Samuel and Catherine that chilled her to the bone. "Maybe we should consider leaving Thomas at the next town," Catherine said quietly, her voice heavy with anguish. "Find him a safe place to stay until the danger passes." Samuel shook his head firmly. "We made a commitment to that boy, Catherine. We're not going to abandon him at the first sign of trouble." "But if the militia finds him with us," Catherine's voice trailed off, unable to voice her fears. "Then we'll face that challenge when it comes," Samuel replied. "But I won't break faith with a child who has already lost everything once." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes as she listened to this exchange. The Whitmans were good people, but they were being forced to make impossible choices because of the hatred and violence that surrounded them. Her brother's safety hung in the balance, dependent on the courage and moral conviction of these strangers who had already risked so much for him. As the wagon train resumed its westward journey, Sarah found herself caught between hope and despair. She had found Thomas and secured a way to stay close to him, but the dangers they faced seemed to grow with each passing day. Apache raiders, military patrols, and the prejudice of their fellow travelers all threatened to tear apart the fragile safety the Whitmans had provided. But Sarah had inherited her father's strength and her mother's determination. She would not give up no matter what challenges lay ahead. Her brother needed her, even if he didn't know she was there, and she would not fail him as she had failed to save their parents. The desert stretched endlessly before them, its vast emptiness holding both promise and peril. Somewhere in that wilderness lay California and the hope of a better life. But first, they would have to survive the journey, and with each mile they traveled, the dangers seemed to multiply. Sarah gripped the turquoise necklace her grandmother had given her, drawing strength from the connection to her ancestors. They had survived countless hardships, adapted to changing circumstances, and preserved their people's traditions through generations of struggle. She would do the same. No matter what lay ahead, she would find a way to protect her brother and preserve their family bond. The journey was far from over, and the greatest challenges still awaited them in the chapters yet to come.